This is a Rattle and Hum Sports podcast for Saturday, August the 3rd, 2013. I'm Bryan Houston. It's Hall of Fame Day, and it's one day before the very first preseason ball game featuring the Dallas Cowboys and the Miami Dolphins. And with us right now to discuss that and do our weekly stock watch is Matthew Postins, a contributor and the Cowboy beat writer for the Rattle and Hum Sports website. How you doing, Matthew?
Fine, Bryan. How are you?
Doing great. Getting ready for some football, I can tell you that right now.
Oh, absolutely. It's time to get it started. I think we've been waiting long enough.
Absolutely. We've been held hostage by crazy baseball season and PEDs. I'm really ready to get on to something else right now. And I'd love to talk about something and hear something other than Riley Cooper right now, too, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Absolutely.
All right, let's first of all update the situation with the Cowboys. First things first, bad news for the Cowboys offensive line. Nate Livings is going to have surgery on his right knee, or actually had surgery on his right knee Friday, I believe. And it looks like he's out now for the rest of camp. Let's talk about the impact on that offensive line that's already down quite a few bodies.
Well, yeah, the Cowboys, they pretty much held off as long as they could to see if maybe they could get this done with just, kind of coaxing Livings along. They gave him breaks during OTAs. They gave him a break during camp. You don't want to put a guy under the knife unless you absolutely have to. And it looks like at this point, if Livings is going to be ready for the regular season, they had to go ahead and make the decision now to get him in surgery and get him going. So how it impacts the offensive line, obviously Livings was in competition at the guard position. With Mackenzie Bernardo back, it does give you a veteran, although he's not going to play on Sunday because he was just approved to start working out on Friday. So you go into the Hall of Fame game on Sunday, and you're probably looking at Ron Leary, David Arkin, Travis Frederick, and Phil Costa playing the guard position primarily in that game. Those four guys are going to be the beneficiaries from both Bernardo and Livings not playing on Sunday. So it just further depletes the depth. There was already pretty thin depth there to begin with, and now with Dominguez hurt and Kowalski hurt, you really got about four healthy guards right now. It's not a good situation for a team that needs competition at the guard position and needs healthy bodies at the guard position.
The other injury of note came to Terrance Williams, who apparently suffered a concussion or is being checked for a concussion after getting hit in the head yesterday during practice. Tell us what you know about that and how that impacts his situation.
Well, it sounds like they're going to be very, very careful with him, and these days with concussions, that's all you can do. Once you've been diagnosed with a concussion, you have to go through the NFL's concussion protocol, which brings in an independent doctor to evaluate Terrance Williams, and he won't be able to practice until that doctor clears him to play. And there are certain things that Terrance Williams has to accomplish based on his baseline test when he came to the NFL in order to get back on the field. So they're going to be careful with him. It doesn't sound like he has a history of concussions. So when you have a guy who has a concussion for the first time, you worry about it, but you don't worry about it like a guy who's had a concussion 3 or 4 times in his career. So they'll be careful with him. They'll give him it doesn't impact the wide receiver depth issue that much right now because they've got a pretty healthy group over there right now. Aside from Williams, I think the only other guy who's really banged up is Danny Cole, and even he's starting to finally get back into workouts on a regular basis now. So it's really more just about resting Williams and making sure that he's healthy once he does come back. Now, if he comes back and has a second concussion this year, then that's going to be a concern for the Cowboys moving forward, certainly.
Yeah, and with him out in practice yesterday, Cole Beasley moved to the slot, and Dwayne Harris became the number 3 receiver on the team. So that's a good opportunity for Cole Beasley, obviously.
Yeah, and the good thing is the Cowboys know what Beasley can do. They know he's a slot guy. That's what he did for them last year. And Harris, he's a guy who I think even if Terrance Williams wasn't here, he'd be the number 3 guy, not necessarily by default, by the fact that Harris is a talented wide receiver and he can do a lot of different things for you on the field. It's just I don't think he has quite the burner quality that Terrance Williams has out there on the outside. So that's where you miss it with Terrance Williams. You miss that outside burner ability, and the Cowboys really wanted to stretch the field with him on one side and Des Bryant on the other, and then they can mix Miles Austin and Cole Beasley and Dwayne Harris and some of these other guys in the slot.
All right, and then we have the Hall of Fame game tomorrow night. The Cowboys take on the Miami Dolphins. It's the first of 5 preseason ball games because of the Hall of Fame game, and we learn now that Tony Romo is not going to play in that ball game.
Yep.
Two bad things about that. Number one, I'd like to see Tony Romo, and I don't want to have to watch Kyle Orton.
Well, the good news is I don't think you're going to see much of Kyle Orton either.
Good.
I would be surprised if he played a quarter.
Good. Because apparently he has not looked great in camp.
No, he hasn't, but I think with a guy like Kyle Orton, you don't concern yourself too much with him this early in training camp. I mean, yes, he is the backup. Yes, he is the guy who would take the snaps if Romo went down, but Orton's a veteran guy who knows how to prepare himself if he has to play it in an emergency in a regular season game. So, he's overthrown a few receivers, grant you that, and he was doing that during minicamp as well. But if you look at the options that are out there on the landscape right now in terms of backups, there really isn't a whole lot out there. So I think the Cowboys will stay with the devil that they have. So you're going to see Orton for about a quarter, and then you'll see a lot of Stevens, and you'll see a lot of Alex Tanney. And I'm really curious to see what Alex Tanney does in a game situation against an opposing defense that basically is told to take it easy on him. I'm really curious to see how he does in that game.
Well, we'll get a chance to see him because, again, Romo's not going to play, so we'll get plenty of Alex Tanney. That ought to just thrill the networks when they start coverage of this game.
Yeah, well, this is part of NBC's contractual obligation. They get the great regular season games, but they have to pay the penance by doing a few preseason games. So
good.
That's just the price of doing business. But as for Romo not being there on Sunday night, I'm not concerned about it. I don't think anybody should be concerned about it. You don't need to expose him at this point to an injury.
All right, very good. All right, we're going to do a stock watch now. We're going to run through some players that are going up and going down. I guess right now, if you're buying stock, first of all, let's talk about Phil Costa.
Yeah, I'd buy stock in him right now. And he's a guy that even though Travis Frederick was the first-round pick for this team and everybody penciled him in as the starting center, he's a guy that even in April I thought to myself, there's a place for Phil Costa on this offensive line, and it may not be at center, it may be at guard. With all the injuries that they've had this past week, one of the big rotations we've seen up front is Phil Costa at center, and then Travis Frederick and Ron Leary at the guard positions. That potentially could be your starting interior going into that first regular season game, depending on how everything shakes out. The Cowboys seem pretty pleased with the progress of those three guys together. And, you have to keep in mind that the Cowboys did not run the ball well last year at all. But the times that they did run the ball well, Phil Costa was the center. You look at that Baltimore game where they just completely ran over the Ravens, and look at that Carolina game where they ran the ball really well in the first half, and then Costa was hurt right at the end of the second quarter. They came back in the second half, and they did nothing on the ground. Whether you like Phil Costa or whether you don't like Phil Costa, he was the key to getting a productive running game for them up front last year. And I feel like he still has a place in this offensive line. It's going to be either at center or it's going to be at guard. But the Cowboys, it's about getting the best three guys in there. And right now, I think, of the guys that are on the field right now, I think he's one of the best three guys as far as the interior goes.
Very good. Another guy on the offensive line that you'd buy stock in, Ron Leary?
Yeah, I would. And I needed to see him in camp before I said one way or the other. He missed the first week with the injury from the conditioning test. I think the thing that the Cowboys wanted to see was whether or not he was going to carry through that momentum that he built during off-season, because he had a great off-season. Most observers believe that Ron Leary had the best off-season of any young Cowboy, and a lot of people believe that he has a real shot at being a starting guard on this team in 2013. But in order to get that shot, you have to be on the field. So he came back earlier this week, got on the field, got into practice, and by all accounts, he hasn't missed a beat from the play that he exhibited during OTAs and during minicamp. It sounds like he carried that momentum through. It sounds like he's still sharp. It still sounds like he's got a firm grasp of everything. So now what you want to see is you want to see the next step. You want to see Ron Leary do it for a couple of quarters in a preseason game against first and second teamers from another team. But right now, the way he's playing, the way he's practicing, I would certainly buy stock in him right now.
Okay, the running game, everybody is holding their breath, praying that DeMarco Murray can make it through the entire season without being injured. But if he does go down, one guy that's really making a name for himself right now looks like Lance Dunbar.
Yeah, it seems like every day when I'm scanning everybody's analysis of practice, and I look at several different people, it seems like everybody's talking about Lance Dunbar, and they're talking about his burst, they're talking about his ability to make plays in open space, they're talking about the fact that he's making guys miss, they're talking about the fact that he's breaking off huge chunks of yardage at a time, and those are the kinds of things that Felix Jones was doing very early in his career before he got banged up, before he gained a little weight. Nobody's going to confuse Lance Dunbar with DeMarco Murray or even Joseph Randle. He's a smaller back. He's speedier. He's shiftier. Some guy asked him a question about whether he felt like he could be the next Darren Sproles, and he kind of soft-pedaled it and said, well, I don't know if I could be the next Darren Sproles, but that wouldn't be a bad thing to be. Darren Sproles has carved out a nice niche for him in the NFL, and, I don't think Dunbar is as shifty as Darren Sproles, but he gives you burst, he gives you top-end speed. He has the ability to catch passes out of the backfield. The real knock on Dunbar last year was that he just didn't understand how to pick up the blitz, didn't understand how to protect the quarterback on third down, so you really didn't see him very much in passing situations. If he improves his ability to pick up the blitz, and by all accounts that appears to be improving, then he's going to see more time on third down, he's going to see more time on passing downs, and maybe he gets 5 to 7 touches a game, and if he can get the ball in open space, he can make an impact.
Over on the defense, this is more a depth issue, but Kyle Wilbur is coming on at a time when they really need him because Anthony Spencer's not able to practice right now.
Yeah, you got that, and of course the Tyrone Crawford injury. We talked a lot about that last week. Wilbur is a guy that I was perplexed as to what the Cowboys were trying to do with him because for a defensive end, he's underweight, and I understand he's gained some weight between when Monty Kiffin was hired and now. But he's still pretty underweight. I mean, he's still not quite 260 pounds, I don't believe. So, that's really borderline for a defensive end. I mean, that's really borderline. But it sounds as if in his backup role, he is doing some really nice things on the weak side. He's not just using his speed to get around guys, but it sounds like he's actually handling things well at the point of contact. There were a couple of plays in practice the other day where Wilbur just basically pushed his way through the tackle that he was opposing in the drill instead of just going around him. He's showing a little bit more, I guess what you would call professional craftiness. He's not just relying on one move and his speed to get it done. He's finding different ways to get around an offensive tackle. And if you're the Cowboys, you like to see that because you don't want pass rushers to be one note. And you can't be a one-note pass rusher in the NFL unless you are exceptionally talented. A guy like Simeon Rice comes to mind. Simeon Rice really only had one move, but he was so good at it for 10 years that he was one of the most feared defensive ends in football. Wilbur doesn't have that top-end speed, so he has to be more of a technician. He has to be a little craftier. He has to be able to do several different things. And it sounds like over the past week and a half, he's really growing as a player as he's getting more playing time.
Okay, in the secondary with that Monty Kiffin defense, safety is a huge position, and it looks like Matt Johnson's stock is going up.
Yeah, it's a really good competition right now at that safety position between him and Will Allen. Allen's a veteran. We talked a little bit about him last week. He has the experience in the cover two. He has the experience playing with Monty Kiffin. But, he's in his 10th year in the league, and you have to wonder, as you go through the season, if that's going to wear on him a little bit. Johnson's in his second year, but more importantly, Johnson still hasn't played in a preseason game yet, much less a regular season game. And the Cowboys are really counting on him to, if not start, at least give them serious time at the position this year. So his progress and his growth as a player is vital. He had a very good offseason. He's come to camp, and he's built on that significantly. The Cowboys like about him is he kind of gives them what Darren Woodson gave them, and I'm not comparing him to Darren Woodson, but Darren Woodson was a great combo safety. He could stop the run. He could defend the pass. They feel like Johnson is that same type of player. That's hard to find these days when safeties are so specialized. You either have safeties that really like to hit the guy, like Roy Williams with the Cowboys several years ago, or you have safeties that were just, great run stuffers, like the Sanders up in Indianapolis for several years was a great run defender, but he wasn't very good at pass coverage. So when you can find a safety who can give you both, you stick with them a little longer, and you see if you see if he can give you something. And so far, Johnson's had a very good camp. He's one of the guys I'm really curious to see on Sunday because he has had so little field time with this team. I'm curious to see what he can do against an opposing offense. The
other thing is he's also on most of the special teams.
He is, and he's going to help them out on kickoff and punts. He has the potential to be a big impact player for them in several different ways this year.
All right, now let's talk about those guys. I don't know if you want to sell them, but it's certainly their stock price is dropping fast. Offensive line again. Here we go. Kevin Kowalski.
Yeah, this is unfortunate because we had Kevin on our rising list last week because he was having a very good camp. He was taking advantage of the fact that both Livings and Bernardo were hurt, and even Leary for that matter. He was starting to make a case for himself. As maybe the 9th or 10th offensive lineman on this team, and now he's hurt, and he's out for 2 or 3 weeks. And when you're a guy like Kevin Kowalski, who hasn't had a whole lot of time in the NFL, that kind of injury, that kind of time off during training camp, that's a killer. I'm not saying that means he's not going to make the team, but he's going to have to sit and wait till probably the third preseason game to play, and that's going to put him far behind other guys at his position. Look at Danny Cole, who missed most of camp last year, who didn't get on the field in the third preseason game, and I thought Danny Cole did some nice things, but he was so far behind everybody else that he just lost the numbers game at that position and ended up on the practice squad. Problem for Kowalski is I don't think he has any practice squad options left. So if he doesn't make the team, he doesn't make the team. So it's a big loss. It's a big loss for him because he was playing so well and he was taking advantage of the situation at guard.
Then we talk about the other position. Nate Livings just has not been able to contribute. He stays injured. I mean, he's almost like the Felix Jones of this team,
I agree.
I mean, he can't stay healthy.
And neither can Bernardo, for that matter. I mean, both of your starting guards from last year, they just cannot stay healthy. And, Bernardo's finally back on the field. Livings got on the field earlier this week, and the Cowboys liked what he was doing for the first few days that he was healthy. And then all of a sudden, back on the injured list, back under the knife, out for the rest of camp. It's a big setback for him, and the Cowboys have a big investment in him. Don't forget, he's got a 5-year, $18 million contract that the Cowboys signed him to last year. So cutting him is a big hit for them. So I don't think Livings gets cut, but I do think that you run the risk of Nate Livings being a backup or perhaps even being moved to injured reserve at the start of the season if it looks like his knee injury is going to prevent him from making a significant contribution this year. So significant loss for the Cowboys, significant loss for Nate Livings because he's trying to prove himself. This is a guy who was on the practice squad in Cincinnati for 3 years, and he finally got a chance and finally made a name for himself in Cincinnati, finally got himself in a position where he could get a good contract and get a good situation, and now, like Mackenzie Bernardo, he just can't stay healthy.
Another guy, and again, that's at the worst possible position on the offensive line. Now, we mentioned Terrance Williams. Is it just because of the concussion that his stock is falling?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, he was doing everything well in camp from what I could tell. But the thing with the concussion is you have to be extremely cautious. Number one, because the NFL is always watching you now. That when you have a player who's a concussion, the NFL is always watching. And we've seen guys now who have, think of Austin Collie in Indianapolis. He had 2 or 3 concussions in a year, and he had not had a concussion history previous to that. So, anytime a guy gets a concussion in the NFL, all of a sudden his stock takes a dip. It's just a natural reaction to the injury because, unlike a knee, unlike a lot of injuries, they heal. And it takes a significant thing to happen for that to recur. If you become a guy with a concussion history, then it doesn't take much, really, to re-aggravate it. Ask Troy Aikman. He had several of them during his career, and it seemed like the longer he went through his career, it took less and less to get him concussed, so to speak.
Yes.
So, you look at Williams, and I'm certainly not willing to sell him or anything at this point, but you're cautious now. You got him on your watch list to sell because that concussion, you just never know how he's going to react to that. He may be fine. He may never have a concussion again the rest of his career, but you have to be cautious at this point.
Okay. tight end U. The Cowboys have become like a Walmart of tight ends. They got one on every shelf. James Hanna, what's his status now?
Well, he's back in practice, but he missed about a week. And, when you're in a competition with Gavin Escobar to basically be the number 2 guy, you really can't miss a whole lot of time. Hanna's a guy that I liked from the end of last year because he was able to stretch the middle of the field, and he was able to do some nice things for the Cowboys, I thought. But his stock has not dropped as much as some other guys because I don't feel as if Gavin Escobar has really taken advantage of the situation. Here's a guy who was drafted in the second round, a guy that I think the Cowboys expected to come in and grab the job by the throat and become Jason Witten's running buddy in that 12 formation. And I don't really feel like he's done that. So, Hanna's stock has dipped a little bit, but it hasn't dipped as much as some of these other guys because, I still feel like, right now, Hanna still could be your number 2 tight end because Escobar really hasn't risen up the way I think the Cowboys or anybody else expected. So it bears watching during camp. I think his stock has dipped a little bit, but I think Hanna can bounce back, and especially with a good game here in the Hall of Fame game, I think he can bounce back and put himself back in a position where he can be the number 2 guy. There's going to be a lot of interchanging at that position, in all honesty, with Hanna and with Escobar, and maybe even with Dante Rosario if he makes the team. But the number 2 guy, that's going to be the guy on the other side of the formation in the 12 opposite Jason Witten. So it's very important to figure out who's the best fit with Jason Witten, going into the regular season because you're going to see that formation a lot.
All right. Well, that being said, and I know he's not on your list, but what about Escobar's stock then?
Well, I think he's kind of holding. I would say if you're going to say buy, sell, or hold, I'd say hold.
He's not making you any money right now then.
He's not making you any money right now, but he's not losing you any money either because he has the measurables, he has the height, he has the hands, he has the ability. I kind of feel like there's something missing, and I'm not sure what that is yet. You watch a guy several times, and he does a good job, but there's nothing sexy about it, for lack of a better word. He doesn't blow you away. I haven't been blown away by him yet, and based on what the Cowboys told us in April and May, I kind of felt like this guy was going to come in and really set the world on fire, and he really hasn't. As we go through camp. So he bears watching. He's going to get playing time because the Cowboys aren't going to be able to get through the whole season with just 2 tight ends. But his play over the next few weeks bears watching to see if it improves, if it stays the same, if he starts to have an impact on the field. Maybe he's one of those guys who practices okay but plays very well in the game. We'll find out as we go through the preseason.
All right, and one last person I just want to throw out there. To me, I would think that tomorrow night is a big night for Randall, the running back that they drafted out of Oklahoma State. I think he's not been great in camp. He's had a hard time picking up the offense. This looks like this is an important night for Joseph Randall tomorrow night.
I think it is too. And a couple of things. They drafted Randall to be basically DeMarco Murray too. I think they were tired of the whole, big guy, little guy rotation they were running with DeMarco Murray and Felix Jones. I think they decided they wanted to go big and a little less big, and that's basically what they're doing with Joseph Randall. He's the same type of back as DeMarco Murray. So he's not necessarily going to be the change of pace guy that a Lance Dunbar is going to be. But, more importantly, he missed all of OTAs and missed minicamp with that thumb injury. He finally got the cast off. He's only been practicing for a couple of weeks. That's not an excuse for not necessarily picking up the offense because he should be taking mental reps on the sideline like a certain quarterback was during OTAs and minicamp, and he seems to be handling the offense just fine. You've got to take those mental reps because you've got to pay attention. You've got to be ready to go when they call your name and when you go on the field. So, yeah, I'd say it is a big night for him because the Cowboys want him to be their number 2 guy. They want him to be the guy that gets 10 to 15 touches a game and takes some of the heat off of DeMarco Murray because they feel like he can be a tough runner between the tackles and they feel like he can be a good red zone threat for them as well. So, he has to show command of the offense, at least enough command of the offense to where the Cowboys feel comfortable using him, especially on third down or especially in goal line situations where you really have to understand what's going on in front of you, the assignments of the different guys in the offensive line, and know where the hole is going to be. So, yeah, big night for him. Big night for a lot of guys, but certainly for Joseph Randall, big night for him. The Cowboys need to see him be productive in that game against Miami.
Very good. Matthew, what are we looking for in the next few days?
Well, at some point we'll wrap up the Hall of Fame game. At some point we'll start talking about the 53-man roster again. Granted, it's still early, but we can start talking about who we think might make the roster at this point and who might not, and any other assorted news that comes out of Valley Ranch as they get ready for their California swing. They start with Oakland next weekend in the preseason.
Very good. Matthew, great talking to you as always, and we will talk to you after the preseason ball game and update what happens with the Cowboys and the Dolphins, okay?
All right, thanks, Bryan.
Very good. Matthew Postins, the Cowboy beat writer and contributor to Rattle and Hum Sports. I'm Bryan Houston. This is a Rattle and Hum Sports podcast. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.